Hi, this is Natalie with The Fifth Journey, and I'm going to be doing a kind of a soaping 101 tutorial today. Just going to be doing a very basic soap without any fragrances or any essential oils, just a plain soap. And with this, if you watch my other videos, when I do the design elements, I kind of fast forward through everything, but I want to talk a little bit more today, so we're kind of going back. So in case you're wanting to know more about cold process soap or true soap, this is a good place to start. If you are wanting more information or want to educate yourself, make sure you read a lot. There's a lot of misinformation out there on the internet and even in some books, because I've read some books. So the way things were done 30, 40, 50, even 20 years ago is not always accurate. So you want to make sure that you educate yourself and using today's standards versus something that was printed, like I said, 20 years ago. So make sure that you educate yourself, and even if you see a recipe that somebody says it works great for them, it may not work well for you. So start off very basic and make sure that you, like I said, read, make lots of notes, and then when you're comfortable, go from there. But start with a very, very basic recipe. So a standard recipe is a third, you want to go a third, so about a third coconut oil, a third palm oil or lard if you want to do that, and a third olive oil. So with that, you want to blend, and this is where you need to do your research. When you want to add in other oils or butters or fats or whatever, you want to make sure that you research the properties, because like coconut oil has awesome bubbles. If you do 100% coconut oil, you're going to have amazing bubbles, but it does strip the skin. So coconut oil is very cleansing, but if you use 100% of it, you could end up stripping your skin so it's dry. Or you can super fat it, which is when you add a little bit extra oils that the lye will not use up. And there are calculators out there that you can use, and make sure every single time you make a change to your recipe, or even a size, if you're using the same oils as always run it through a calculator. Make sure that you have the correct proportions in your recipe, because otherwise you could end up with something that's oil heavy or lye heavy. So what I have here, I have my oils that I warmed up and then has been allowed to cool, because I have the solid oils in there, and you can't just put your oils in there and have clumps of different butters and things. You have to blend it all out. Make sure it's nice and smooth, so put it in the microwave. You can do it on a stove. Never ever ever use aluminum. Stainless steel is the only thing that you can use, or plastic. Make sure it is number 5, or it's a sturdy plastic, so make sure that you're not using poor quality items. And glass, you really should not use glass because of the temperature fluctuations, especially with the lye. And never ever use glass when you are actually mixing the lye into the water, because the temperature shoots up so fast it could shatter your glass, and then you're going to have a big mess and potential burns on your hands. So make sure that you have everything covered. And as you can see, I have long sleeves on, because when you splash, you don't want it on your skin. And I have, like I said, I have this covered. I have an old towel on the floor, and I'm going to kind of move the camera a little bit so you can see. You can see over there, I have my scale, but I also have, this is my recipe book. I have everything in there. And then right there, I have, 4 or 5 sets of goggles. I have a mask. The goggles I wear all the time. The mask I wear when I mix the lye into the water. And if you can, let's see if I can move the camera. Over there, you can't really see it, but that is the sink over here. And I actually have my lye solution cooling in there, so it will be ready to go. And I actually did that, about an hour ago. And different soap makers soap at different temperatures. So depending on what you're wanting to do, depending on the fragrances you're using, a lot of times people recommend soaping at room temperature. I prefer to soap around 100 degrees. So I do my lye mixture first, and then I carefully transfer that, let it sit in the sink. And then I do my oils. I heat them up in a safe container in the microwave until they're about the same temperature. And of course, everything is all melted. And then I wait for them to both drop in temperature until they're about 10 degrees apart. So this, I measured a little bit ago, this is about 80 some degrees, and then my lye is about 90 some degrees. So I'm at a good place where I can blend in. If you're using finicky fragrances like a floral or like an essential oil like clove that speeds up trace. We'll get to that in a second. You'll definitely want to soap at a cooler temperature. Now, something else I wanted to talk about is using a water discount. So when you are making soap, a true soap has to have lye. If it doesn't have lye, then it's not a true soap and it's made with chemicals and detergents. And that's what cleans your skin, not a true soap. So you have to have lye, and every single oil, every single butter has a different saponification value. So it has different amounts of requirements on how much lye you use. So that's why the soap calculators are very important. Now, over there in my book, I have my favorite recipes that I created, and I have those all printed out, and then some variations. So one thing that you can do to play with to speed up the curing time is using something called a water discount or a liquid discount. And usually a full water amount is about 2 times the amount of lye, and that can vary depending on the soap maker. So some people use as little as 1 time. So say you need 10 ounces of lye for whatever soap that you're making, or however many oils or whatever oils you're making, then you would use 10 ounces of liquid to mix that in. Now, you'll need to know your recipe. I don't recommend that for a beginning soaper. I recommend doing 2 times the amount until you get comfortable with it. I usually use about 1.5 to mix into my oils. And with the curing process, the actual saponification happens in about 24 to 48 hours, kind of depending on your recipe and what's in there. And then it is safe to handle without gloves. But until then, you must cover your skin and wear goggles, make sure that you're covered. And depending again on your recipe and the oils, and you'll have to play with this, you can unmold within a couple hours to, sometimes it takes a week. My very first recipe I used a plastic container. I do not recommend, and I could not get it out of the mold for a month because it had no way of evaporating that extra liquid. So I like to use rectangular silicone molds, and then sometimes, like what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a plain soap. So I have these individual soap molds that I'm going to be pouring it into, and then I also have these little molds that are shapes that I'm going to be using for embeds. So this I'm going to be using in other soaps later, and then I'll have some plain soaps there. I don't think I'm forgetting anything. So we're going to go ahead and get started, but I want to kind of go over oils really quick. So like I said, a good starting recipe is 1/3 olive oil, 1/3 coconut oil, and 1/3 of like a palm or a sustainable palm or a lard. If you're comfortable doing that, that actually makes a wonderful soap, or even beef towel. So that's a good starting recipe. You want to research what your ingredients are to make sure that you're not using too much of something. So like an olive oil, that is a wonderful soap, but it's going to take, gosh, about 6 months to a year to cure. So it's actually a really hard bar of soap. So really, research those ingredients, research your products, and even fragrances and essential oils, especially essential oils, because a lot of people can have issues with essential oils. Make sure that you're using safe amounts for your recipe. So again, there's calculators out there, there's usage rates that you can use, that you can look up. So make sure that you do your research. Don't just dump stuff together because you're going to have a mess. So I'm going to go ahead and get suited up. I've got everything handy. I've got these plastic throwaway gloves, disposable gloves, and I will wash these and use them again a few times before they wear out. I had used thicker kitchen gloves before, but they wear out as well because you're dealing with lye and it gets on your hands, and the soap gets on there and everything. So they do wear out eventually. I try to use them more than once. But let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to grab my lye that has been cooled down. Put my goggles on. And again, I'm not putting in any other additives. There's no clays, there's no colorants, there's no fragrances or anything like that. And I always have rags handy and nearby. So if you can see this, there is a little bit of a skim on top. And you can get that when you do a greater liquid discount. And if they're big chunks, you can strain them out, like with a coffee filter. Make sure it's a coffee filter, not like an aluminum sieve, because that would be really bad. And if they're not very big, they'll blend right in. So this will be fine. And real quick, when you do your lye solution, you can practice doing like juices. You can do, like I've done apple cider, I've done green tea, I've done a lot of different things. Sugars, research that, because sugars can cause your soap to overheat and they'll volcano and make a really big mess. And you want to make sure that everything is nice and cold when you start, because adding the lye to the water, remember, always, always, always add the lye to the liquid, not the other way around. It's going to shoot up to about 180, 200 degrees. So it's going to get very, very hot very, very quickly. Make sure that you're working in a well-ventilated area. Where I am, I have a microwave with a vent fan above me, and my husband vented it so it actually goes outside. So I do have lots of ventilation in here. And anyway, so make sure that your liquids are cool before you add the lye solution to it. Also, if you have anything, like if you're using any type of milks, or even the fruits, like if I do an aloe and cucumber, I will freeze it into cubes, or carrot. I did carrot recently. I'll freeze it into cubes and then add the lye slowly to that and then allow it to come to temperature. So I'm gonna go ahead and get started. I have my emulsion blender here, and you'll definitely want to get one of these because it will take hours and hours and hours and hours and hours before you can hit saponification if you're using a whisk or a spoon. And I actually, this does have a little bit of soap. I had done a plain batch before this, so, and I'm not concerned about that, so it's got just a little bit on there. And then I'm going to slowly pour this in, and you want to pour it in down the stick, because if I just dump it in, it could splash and get on me, and we don't want that to happen. I'll give it a little stir. And with your lye containers, again, this is not glass, you don't want to mix it in with the oils or the soaps. You want, and not wash this in dishwasher either, because then you'll start getting a film and it could make your lye really funky. So the best way to rinse this out is just let it sit for a second and then rinse it out with water. And then let it dry. Lots and lots of water. Okay, so as you can see there, it's starting to get a little bit cloudy, but if this were a clear bowl, you'd see the oils on top and the lye on bottom. And this is going to get kind of loud, but I'm going to give it a little stir, and then I'm going to pulse it for like 3 to 5 seconds. And then you just mix. So you want to go back and forth doing that. One thing I forgot to say is when you put your stick in, you don't want to plop it down in there, because if you can see, you're going to see those bubbles, you're going to get bubbles, and you don't want bubbles in your soap. So you put it in there at an angle and you tap it. So give it a stir. You can see I kind of have some oily layers in there, so it's not fully emulsified. So when you become, let me stop, when you become more advanced, you will want to take your soap to basically barely emulsification, but when you're just beginning out, you want to go to a thicker trace until you're more comfortable, and of course comfortable with your recipe once you find a recipe that you like. Okay, so right here I'm at a thin trace, and trace is basically, if you were to lift, and I don't know if you can see it from the camera, but if you were to lift your stick blender up and you were to trace your name, you should be able to see it, and then it settles back down. So I don't know if you can see it in there, but this is a very light trace, and if I do a shape, you can see, let me go over here, can you see it there? You can kind of see the lines in there versus like oily marks. So this is a light trace, and then you can go to a medium trace, which is kind of like a little bit, kind of a thin pudding, and then you can go to a very thick trace, which is like a very thick custard or a thick custard. So also depending on the layers that you want to do or the designs, you may want a thinner trace, you may want a thicker trace. Or if you're using fragrances that are being kind of finicky, they will make your trace, your soap trace faster, your water trace faster. Since I'm not adding anything into it, I'm going to go ahead and go a little bit thicker, and then we'll pour it into the molds. And that's where I want it to be, and I'm going to set this aside to clean up later. And let me pull out of the oven the ones I did earlier. Let's see. So ignore the lumpy ones, but these three are ones that I had poured earlier. These were just scraps from a blend that I had done, and these are I'm going to use at home. So these I poured, gosh, 3 hours ago, I think, and they're already firmed up. And I'll go ahead and mold them tomorrow, but see how it's already pulling away from the mold. If I used a lot of liquid, like a twice as much, a 2 to 1, then I would not be able to unmold those until probably tomorrow. But the silicone molds are nice. Usually when I use a loaf mold, I will wait a day or two. Now with the oven, and this is something else, of course, you'll need to research, is I'm doing kind of a forced gel, and you want to look up to gel or not to gel. And usually gelling will make colors a little bit more vibrant, but it does heat up the soap, so you have to be careful if you're using fragile ingredients or fragile fragrance oils or essential oils, because it can ruin them, it can burn them off. Because what I have been doing, and I can show you this as well, is I'm doing some soap testing for clients. So I have different fragrances that I added in. That was just a little bit, it was left over. So the oven is not on, but I just put it in there, I put the light on, and then let it come to the gel that way. And it does kind of get a little bit translucent. Some people like to gel. I personally prefer to do it, and some people don't. If you don't like to do that and you want to stop it, then you'll want to put it in the fridge or the freezer right away to cool it down, because if it partially gels, you're going to end up with a ring in the middle of your soap. And it's not harmful, it doesn't do anything, but some people just don't care for what that looks like. So we're going to go ahead and pour it into these molds, and I'm going to actually pour it into these, my little embed shapes first, and then we'll talk a little bit more in a second. Let me grab a colander so I can do that. Actually, I'm going to go ahead and do this now while we're talking. So this, see how it is thickened up, and if I put my hands on the side of the bowl, it has warmed up. Let me see how warm it's gotten. It probably hasn't warmed up much. We're at 99 degrees. So it has started to warm up, and as when the saponification process happens, when it actually is becoming soap, the soap will heat up. And that is totally natural. And again, I've got everything covered. Lots of rags around. I'm going to go ahead and pour this in here. When you are adding fragrances, again, you want to make sure and check the usage rates and to see if it's even skin safe or not, because some oils are good for candles or potpourri or cleaning or whatever, but they are not good for your skin. And there are some essential oils, especially is what I'm talking about, that cause issues with people. So like rosemary shouldn't be used by people who have seizures, but that's stuff that you can look up. So make sure that you research all of your ingredients before you use them. And especially if you're selling things, that's even more important that you're researching everything, okay? On your fragrances, some people will add them in and then put them in with the stick blender. I personally prefer to stir them in, because if I have something that's going to speed things up, I do not want to use a stick blender, because then you're going to have, if it's a problem, then you're going to have a big wad of soap on the end of your stick blender, and then you've got to scrape it off. Not totally ruined, but you're not going to be able to do much with it other than scrape it off and mash into a mold. So there's lots of different types of soap making and different methods, different versions, and play with them. So I've been making soap. I started out with the glycerin melt and pour soap about a year and 9 months ago, and then I started doing cold process soap, which is what this is, about a year ago, after I was very comfortable with the recipes and all the research that I had done. So I can't stress that enough, that you do research everything. Or find somebody local, or find a soap maker that you love and support small businesses and purchase from them. Actually, that's the reason why I started soap making, is my dad was an artist, so I grew up going to art shows and craft shows, and we have been buying handmade soap from someone forever. They've been making soap since either the 70s or early 80s, I don't really remember, but they're actually retiring, and they told me they were going to be retiring about 2 years ago, and I was either going to need to start buying from somebody else or start making it myself. So I figured, well, I'll just make it for myself, and then I realized that I liked it. I enjoyed it. And here we are. So that's just kind of what happens. And there's so many different ingredients to use and recipes, and like the testing, like I showed earlier, I have a customer who wants to do wholesale, and they want a specific fragrance. So they kind of gave me some ideas of what they wanted, and that's where we're going from there. So I again did some research. I wrote down a whole bunch of different fragrance combinations, and then I did the usage rates, figured out how much I needed for however many ounces. So really each one of those soaps was 3.5 ounces. So I had to figure out how much fragrance I needed for each of those. And then working very quickly, I actually have a video where I do is fast forward, where I'm doing soap samples, because I did it earlier in this last year. I did it over the winter, and it's not a lot of fun to do when you're testing 34, I think it was 34 fragrances that I did last time. It was 25 this time, but you have to work really fast because the soap starts to set up. Anyway, it was something that I had originally tested for myself because I wanted to get some 100% natural soaps using only essential oils. And when I did that, I figured, hey, I'm not going to do this again. And then the client found me a couple months later and said, hey, let's do this. So hopefully that'll be my last time doing it to that extent. I'm getting there. So I'm going to go ahead and finish filling these up, and then while I'm doing that, I'll talk a little about cleanup. So on your cleanup, you don't want to just go and toss this in your sink and start washing, because the lye and the oils and whatever is in your sink drain can build up and create clogs in your drains, and you don't want to do that. So what I do is I go ahead and wipe everything out with rags, and then I throw those rags in a bag actually I usually wait until the next week. You can do it a couple days, but I wait for them to basically become soap. So the rags with soap on it. And I let the dishes sit aside for a couple days, or if you need to put them in a bag to get them out of the way, if you don't have a big space, you can do that too. But you want to make sure that you're not washing them for a few days. And then when you're ready to clean them, make sure you're using hot water, as hot as you can stand it, to really clean everything up. And then, of course, wiping down your surfaces. I have a spray bottle that has a vinegar and water solution in it. So if I have a spill, because vinegar neutralizes lye, and so if I have a spill or cleaning up after soap making, I'll go ahead and spray everything down with that, let it sit for a little bit, and then I'll clean it up with the rags and put the rags in that same bag. And then we're good to go till next time. Also, making sure that you have specific tools for soap making, that you're not using your kitchen items like your spoons and everything, because if you have any type of cross-contamination or anything, you don't want to have that happen. I totally missed filling that one up. So, thank you for joining me. Thank you for watching. And I'll go ahead and finish filling this up. But I've got plenty of other videos out there. I like to test ingredients, test new things, and try new things. So thank you again for joining me, and hope you learned something, and we'll see you again next time.